what is stress doing in our bodies at sort of, and you can delve into as geeky of biochemical mechanisms or neurological mechanisms as you'd like here, but what's going on that's actually causing the stupid, slow, and sick effect?
Yeah. So the reason why the human body reacts to stress in the way that it does is that it's designed to prepare for predatory attacks. So if you want to really understand it, we got to go back in time a few thousand years. Let's say we're hunting and gathering in the woods. Saber-toothed tiger jumps out with the intent to kill. Well, first thing that's going to happen is that your digestion will flood with acid, because we got to shut down digestion because it's wasting too much of our energy if we need that energy to fight or flee the tiger. That same acid will then seep onto your skin so that you don't taste very good if you get bitten into by that tiger. Just like, I think Dr. Gundry is really talking about how plants will release chemicals when they are like eaten or killed. Like everything wants to survive, right? So the skin becomes acidic, so you don't taste very good if the tiger bites into you. That's actually what causes the premature aging, is that acidity on the skin. It breaks down skin elasticity. Your bladder and bowels will evacuate so that you can be light on your feet. This is what the nervous poos are before we have big presentations to make, or we get really stressed. Your immune system will go to the back burner, because who cares if you're going to get cancer if you're about to be killed by a tiger. Your adrenaline levels increase, your cortisol levels increase. And I don't love teaching from fear tactics, but if people want to freak themselves out, just have a quick Google search about what adrenaline and cortisol are doing to you. Now, as I'm sure you have shared many times, it's not bad for you to get stressed. It's terrible for us to stay stressed. And you actually introduced me to this concept of hormesis, right? Of this acute short-term stress that actually is good for the body. And so that's why I'm saying it's not bad for you to get stressed, to do a high intensity interval workout, great. But this chronic low grade fight or flight is killing us. Harvard Medical School is saying that stress is responsible for 90% of all doctors' visits, and people are calling it the black plague of our century. And that's because this series of chemical reactions is very good for you. It's very useful if your demands are predatory attacks. But if your demands are in-laws or kids or being an entrepreneur or deadlines or red-eye flights, then this fight or flight thing has become maladaptive, and it's actually disallowing us from performing at the top of our game. It is disallowing us from being fully present, fully here, and allowing all of our hormonal functions, endocrine functions, immune functions to go as nature intended, because we're basically just taxing the brain and body. It's like having a bunch of open windows running old, irrelevant programs on your computer. You're not going to have all of the energy that you need for the task at hand. So this is what I'm saying. This is what I mean when I say stress is making us stupid, sick, and slow.
I'm not good at the whole internet windows thing. I have like 90 internet windows on my browser right now.
I am known to do a lot myself, but if you were to get to like, say 200 or 300, and it were to slow you down and you were typing an email and the cursor was 20 spaces behind, you would probably go in and shut down some of those windows.
Yes.
And the thing is that by the time the average American is 20 years old, we have approximately 10 million open windows on our brain machine. They're called premature cognitive commitments, or PCCs. And all those open, old, stressy windows are slowing us down from the now. It's why we pick up our phone and we're like, why did I pick up my phone? It's why you read a chapter of a book. You're like, what did I even just read? Or you're at a cocktail party having a conversation with someone, and then you realize, like, I don't even know what you just said because I was busy checking out everyone else at the party. And so what we do with the meditation is that, yes, we go and we give the body some deep healing rest. It's able to close down those old irrelevant windows, get us out of that fight or flight mode. And then we have more energy, more presence for the task at hand. And it's that very phenomenon that allows us to accomplish more in less time.
Yeah. I'll share a related little breakthrough that I had just very recently. Meditation, I agree, is 100% is huge for that and sort of getting out of that brain mode. But if I took my camera right over here next to where you're seeing me right now, I have like this big whiteboard on the wall now, and it's like a productivity technique called Kanban. But anyway, people can Google that if they want. But it basically just, I write down literally like not just today's to-do list, but I write down every task that I have to do like for the next month. And I found that just getting those things out of my head onto paper, external from my brain, is like just this wave of like relief, because I realized how much mental energy is constantly being consumed by just trying to remember constantly all of the things that I have to do. And it's like dozens of things, you know, it's, as you know, managing a business can be extremely demanding. So I think those people don't realize, and even I didn't realize until very recently, how much mental energy is being consumed constantly by just having those, what did you call them? Pre-cognitive?
Premature cognitive commitments.
Premature cognitive.
Yeah, premature, which might be a little bit different than like an open loop, but we can chat about that. But that's amazing. What's it called? Kanban?
Kanban. I think it's a Japanese word. It's Kanban.
Okay.
It's not like super well known. It's not as well known as like getting things done, the GTD method. But I've found, just for me, like you write things down on Post-it notes and you move them from sort of your like potential tasks you can do to the in progress and then to the completed. And like just the physical movement of a task externally from like potential to I'm choosing to work on this at this moment today to I've finished with this. Like I found it's really nice for the brain. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much. I just thought that was somewhat related.
Yeah. And so when you start your workday, do you move the Post-its into like, this is what I'm going to do today?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the tricks is that you're not allowed to have more than 2 things at any given time in the doing column. So it forces you to like stay focused on no more than 2 things. And
is that for men and women? Because
no, it's only for men. Sorry.
No, I'm serious. It's actually a real question, because, you know, I feel like the male and female brain, and I know this is a bit of a gender stereotype, and I know we're living in an age of gender fluidity, but if we look at like biological evolution, you know, men were typically hunters and women were gatherers. And so I actually think that women are better suited to multipreneurship and what I would call like a simultaneity of consciousness.
Did you say multipreneurship?
I did.
Are you just making up words on this podcast right now?
I can't say that I made that up, but Marie Forleo may have invented that word.
Okay.
It is sort of in the zeitgeist of the female entrepreneur, largely due to Marie Forleo.
Gotcha.
Because she calls herself a multipreneur, because she was like, I'm in fitness and I'm an author and I'm a coach and I have this B school. And so I think because, you know, you're gathering and you're dealing with kids, there is a simultaneity of consciousness happening in your mind versus that like laser sharp focus that happens when you're hunting prey. Yeah. And so I would be interested to know if there's studies done on the male brain versus the female brain there.
That is either really true and amazing or a very elaborate rationalization for multitasking.
I could go either way. I'm happy to be proved one way or the other. If being a parent teaches you anything, it's the humility of when you're right and wrong, and also that you don't know anything. So
the subtitle of your book is called Stress Less, or actually the main title, Stress Less, Accomplish More. I remember talking to you like a year and a half ago when the book was just sort of in the early visions of it. And I think Stress Less, Accomplish More was the subtitle, wasn't it?
Yes. It used to be called the M word.
Yeah.
Which I liked, but HarperCollins ixnayed that for a lot of reasons. One, they were like, if they don't know you, they don't know meditation, you wouldn't necessarily know to pick that up because it wouldn't be obvious it was about meditation. And also we didn't want to be confused with the N word. And like the last thing I want to do is be associated with anything that is racist or the
F word. Yeah. I mean, I think all the expressions that have the blank word in them have a negative connotation. I could be wrong about that, but I mean, N word, F word.
C word.
C word. Yes.
Yeah. But I was okay with that because I think, and this is changing, but I think a lot of people, when they hear the word meditation, they have a visceral, sometimes positive, but oftentimes negative response. Like, I don't have time for that. That's too woo-woo. That's not for me. I can't clear my mind. Like, there's so many snap judgments when you hear that word meditation, which is actually why I wanted to call it the M word. Because I was like, look, if you hate meditation, cool. Just try this thing. See how you feel. If you think you have a meditation practice, cool, just try this, see if it isn't different, see if you don't get more of a return on your investment. And so that's why I like that title. But this one, I think Stress Less, Accomplish More, I like it because the promise is in the title. It's like, hey, who doesn't want to stress less? Who doesn't want to accomplish more? And it's really speaking to this idea that stress is ultimately making us stupid. And then the subtitle for this one is Meditation for Extraordinary Performance.
Yeah. So I want to come back to this performance and accomplishment aspect of things. I think we've sort of alluded to it, but I want to have you speak to that. I was going to say, I want to speak to that, but I want to have you speak to that more directly. And I one of the things that we talked about last time that I think is a very useful concept is this concept of adaptation energy. And so how does that figure into this picture of meditation and how it relates to performance?
So adaptation energy, I would define as your ability to adapt to life's demands, right? So life is giving us a constant stream of decisions to make, a constant stream of changes of expectation. You know, we got on the highway this morning expecting there not to be traffic, and then whoo, change of expectation, a demand, there's traffic. We expected not to oversleep our alarm, but we did, and we woke up late and it burned up a little bit of adaptation energy. We showed up at our job today, we expected not to get fired, but we did, burned up some adaptation energy. You call your partner and you're like, babe, I just got fired from my job. You expected for them to get dinner and maybe a bottle of wine, and instead they broke up with you. Change of expectation burns up some adaptation energy. So you get home after like the worst day of all time and you pour yourself maybe a glass of water, whiskey or something, and that glass slips out of your hand and breaks on the kitchen floor. Now at this point, you're going to start crying, screaming at the glass, punching the kitchen wall, running away from the glass, all because you were out of adaptation energy and yet you had another demand. And if that happens, if you're out of adaptation energy and life gives you another demand, then you're going to launch involuntarily into a fight or flight stress reaction, whether you've read Eat, Pray, Love or not, whether you have read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or not, because we all know how we should be acting. Most of us are not doing that because we don't act in accordance with what we know. We act in accordance with the baseline level of stress in our nervous systems. And so if you engage in a daily discipline of eradicating this backlog of stresses, then you are simultaneously increasing your capacity to adapt. It's like you carve out the stress and then you have a bigger vessel for adaptation energy, which does not mean that bad things won't happen. Okay, it does not mean that your demands go away. It doesn't mean the traffic suddenly disappears or that no one's ever going to die again. Like life is still life, you're still a human, but you have this bigger capacity to more elegantly roll with the punches that life is inevitably going to throw you. And that might seem like a small thing, but it's not. Like you not losing your temper on your kid one night might not be a big deal, but a week of that, a year of that, you have a different life. You have a different relationship with your kid. One day that you didn't freak out when your boss changes your deadline on you might not change your life, but a month of that may change your life. That may be the thing that gives you the raise or gets you the promotion. One date where you don't freak out and try to prove how awesome you are, that might not change your life, but 4 dates, 10 dates, that might allow you to be more available to meeting your soulmate. So if you believe in those kinds of things, but so it's basically it's a chain reaction of these series of tiny little moments where we can show up and adapt to what that moment calls for instead of bringing a lifetime of baggage into every single upset.
Awesome. Great explanation.
Thank you.
Another thing that you talk about is, I remember hearing you say this in the in-person course. You said, a lot of people will say things like reading is my meditation, or going out in nature is my meditation, or playing with my dog is meditation, or going for a run is meditation. And you're like, no, meditation is meditation. Those things, running is running, and playing with your dog is playing with your dog. And those things can be joyful and relaxing and so on. But meditation is meditation. Yeah. So why do you harp on that distinction? What is so physiologically different about meditation? And I know we've talked about some of those things before, but what's sort of the distinction there?
So I think people are just looking for excuses to not do it because they've never been trained on how to do it. It's like, because meditation is simple, we think we should already magically know how to do it. And because people aren't really investing any time to get trained, they sit down, they try to clear their mind. They can't, because that's impossible. The mind thinks involuntarily, and they're like, oh, I'm not into meditation, so running is my meditation, or exercise is my meditation. But it's just not true. With exercise, you're exciting your nervous system. You're increasing your metabolic rate. And the opposite is happening when you meditate. When you meditate, you are decreasing your metabolic rate. You're slowing down the rate with which the body consumes oxygen. And it is actually that de-excitation of the nervous system that starts to create order in the body. And it is creating order in our cells that allows that lifetime of stress and trauma to start to come up and out. And so while exercise is good enough for you to handle your stress from today, like if your boss yells at you, you launch into fight or flight, you go to the gym and you get on the treadmill, you could outrun that tiger. So you could burn off today's adrenaline and cortisol. But if you want to get rid of that dog that barked in your face when you were 10, or your parents divorced when you were 12, then we have to actually give the body rest. We have to de-excite the nervous system. So that's one thing, and that's speaking to the meditation dealing with the stress from the past. But the other thing is that when you're practicing Ziva, you're actually accessing a verifiable fourth state of consciousness. So different than waking, different than sleeping, different than dreaming. And all of those activities that you just mentioned, playing with my kids, walking my dog, being in nature, surfing, mountain climbing, playing music, those are all awesome. And you can find joy and fulfillment and create dopamine. Like, you can be in a better state by doing all of those. But at the end of the day, you're still in your waking state of consciousness doing any of those activities. Now, in Ziva, you're accessing this fourth state of consciousness where the right and left hemispheres of the brain start to function in unison. And that's important because, one, the left brain is the critical mind and the right brain is the creative mind. So we want these guys talking to each other. But actually, over time, with this, the whole brain is lighting up. So you're actually increasing neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change itself. And you're strengthening something called the corpus callosum, which is that thin white strip that connects the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And so it actually, over time, it starts to get thicker and thicker. And that's a cool party trick, that sitting in a chair could let you have a fat corpus callosum. But that matters because it's quite literally the bridge between your masculine and your feminine, your critical and your creative, your past and future, and your present moment.
It is a good party trick, except for the fact that people can't see through my cranium and notice how thick my corpus callosum is. But if it weren't for that, it would be a great party trick.
One of my students this week, she recommended that I make a t-shirt that says, "My corpus callosum is hella fat." Like, I love you.
Nice. Nice. I'm curious, have you looked at all into the state of consciousness of flow, of like flow states? And I know that there's been some recent sort of publications where they've even sort of mapped out the conditions that are most conducive to getting in a flow state. And I'm spacing on all of them, but I remember one of the most interesting ones is that there was that a heightened state of risk is one of the conditions. So for example, people who are rock climbers can get into a flow state. If people saw the recent movie with Alex Honnold called Free Solo, where he's climbing up the 3,000-foot cliff without a rope, he's basically entering in a flow state that whole time, and he's able to sort of block out the fear, the fact that if one little slip or one little hold pops off the wall, he'll fall to his death. But even, surfing big waves, people talk about getting addicted to that flow state. When you're in a state where there's a potential for you to die or be seriously harmed, you can enter into this state of consciousness that's like, time slows down, your presence is completely heightened, and you're physically aware of everything. I'm just curious if you've looked into that at all and how it would differ from a meditative state. And I have no clue what the answer to that question is, but I'm just curious if you have any idea what the distinctions might be.
Yeah, so I haven't done a ton of like nitty-gritty scientific research on it, but I have some sort of philosophical pontifications on it because I'm friends with Jamie Wheel, who's like of the Flow Genome Project, and I've been on mountains with him where he'll like drink some coffee and smoke some weed and then go down ski like double black mountains, and he does that, and he'll talk about that because he's like trying to access flow state, and and look, whatever floats your boat. And I think that works. Like, he's written a whole book about it. But the thing that I just want to highlight is that over time, if you're consciously putting yourself into a fight or flight, like, I might die in this situation, like, it might feel good for a minute, and it might, and obviously I haven't seen Free Solo, but I've heard it's incredible. And certainly there are people that are in very high states of consciousness that have specific extraordinary gifts. But my only concern about that is that, what is that doing to your adrenals over time? Like, is that sustainable for you to be in that fight or flight for years, months, decades on end? And like you said, you can sort of get addicted to it. Or like, free divers or like free jumpers, it's like you have, each time it has to be a bigger mountain, a bigger wave. And there's something beautiful about that, because that in itself is a type of accomplishment and achievement. But what I would consider flow state, and the way that I talk about it, is that each meditation, you're accessing this present moment awareness, which is what we're ultimately looking for when we're putting ourselves into that, like, well, I have to I have to be so present with where I put my hand, otherwise I'll die. That's a type of presence. And similarly, in the meditation, you're accessing that presence, but in a very different way. It's through rest. And in that state, your brain is very much on guard, but your body is getting very deep healing rest. And so it's the opposite of what we think about when we think about meditation, because you're not deaf, you're not dumb, you're not blind, you're hyper aware of what's going on, and your metabolic rate is decreasing. So when we access that, we flood our brains and bodies with dopamine and serotonin in the meditation. And then after your first meditation, that might stay with you for 1 minute. After your second meditation, that dopamine and serotonin might stick around for 5 minutes. After a few weeks, it might stick around for 15 minutes. And then bit by bit, meditation by meditation, that dopamine and serotonin, which is really the thing we're chasing, starts to stick around with you for longer and longer periods of time, and still until it's with you 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And that's what I would call flow state, where you're in that total right brain, left brain cohesion, where you've got the critical mind and the creative mind firing at 100%.
Yeah, excellent. I love it. A quick digression, I'll just mention, since we just talked about this, right after I saw that movie in the theaters like a few weeks ago, like 3 days later, I actually ran into Alex Honnold at the rock climbing gym here in San Diego.
What?
And yeah, he just happened to be here in San Diego, like as part of the media tour. And he happened to be like, literally, I did a climb and I came down and he was like standing 3 foot to my right. And I looked over at him like, what the hell? Like, I just saw you in a movie 3 days ago. You're not supposed to be at my local rock climbing gym. But yeah, anyway, just a cool.
Well, did you talk to him? Or did you?
I talked to him briefly. Yeah. Very nice guy. And I actually, funny enough, just watching him climb, just like observing him rock climb in person, I had like something click in my brain where I instantly became a better climber. And
why? What did you notice?
I noticed that he trusts his feet when he's on. So in rock climbing, for people that are unfamiliar with it, oftentimes you have extremely tiny footholds, like things that you would never think are possible for a human to stand on. And the intuitive reaction that you have, that most people have, that I've always had, when I stand on these tiny little nubs, imagine like the tip of a finger, like an eighth of an inch sticking off the wall, and you have to sort of sink your weight into that, the edge of your shoe. The reaction is that I always tense up my upper body. So like the amount of tension that I have in my hand holds, whatever I'm holding on to, I get extra tense here because I'm subconsciously thinking that my foot's going to pop off the wall, and that the foothold's not going to hold me. Mm-hmm. And what I learned from watching him, just like physically observing the way he moves, is that he sinks his weight into these little tiny footholds that most people would have a hard time trusting, and allows his hands to be more relaxed in the process, and just to be more energetically efficient in that process. Mm. And I literally, after watching him climb a route, I got up on the next route, which was a grade of difficulty that would normally be very hard for me. And I just breezed through it like it was no big deal. And I literally, since that day, which was about a month ago or a month and a half ago, I've been a full grade climber than I was prior to that. Like, so I did a big jump. Like I had been, I don't want to get into the details of the grades because it's kind of a weird rating system that if people who are not familiar with rock climbing won't be able to make sense of. But basically I did a jump in difficulty that would normally take several months of practice or maybe a year or two of practice. And like it happened just like a light switch, just from one little observation of somebody who's an amazing climber, just watching the way they move their body.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Two things I'd love to share. One, there's this concept in the meditation circles called darshan, where it's why people seek out gurus, where it's like you just being in the presence of someone in a very high state of consciousness can elevate your state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue the validity of that or not. You know, we could argue the like ethics of that, but there, you know, there's a reason why like thousands of people stand in line to hug this woman named Amma. Like there's this darshan, it's like surge of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like to me like he is forget about the climbing, like there's something happening mentally with this man that he can achieve what he's able to do and accomplish these sort of extra human feats.
Mm-hmm.
And so you being in that and watching with the talent and the intricacy that you have, you know, it's possible that you had this sort of darshan. What's cool is that it's sustainable, that these things that you ingested are sticking with you.
Yeah, actually, real quick to add to that, in the movie they did a brain scan on him, like a fMRI imaging scan, and they actually looked at his amygdala and the sort of the limbic system, and found that it's way less active than basically anybody else than normal people. So in other words, his fear response systems are just way de-excited. The baseline level there, like he can be 1,000 foot up on a wall with no rope and not be in the state of terror that everyone else in the world would be in.
And do you know, did they say in the movie, was he born with that, or is that because of this lifetime of training that he's developed that?
I don't think anybody has an answer to that. They did show that he's been climbing things since he was a little kid, but yeah, I mean, even for me, I've experienced a de-excitement of that. Like as soon as I used to get above 40 feet up, even with a rope, I would have this like totally illogical fear just because I didn't like being high up. I'm like, if I'm looking down and I'm thinking, if something breaks, like I will fall to my death or wish that I'm dead because I'm so badly injured. So my body would just kind of seize up and I wouldn't be able to move and do physical movements that were easy for me if I was 5 feet off the ground. So, but now, you know, like my threshold for doing things, like I can be 60 feet up and going for crazy moves and, you know, or 80 feet up or 100 feet up or something like that. And it's way less scary for me than it used to. So it's possible that maybe he's just been doing it so much for so long that he's just learned to bring that state of relaxation and calm into this act, which would be terrifying for almost anybody else.
Yeah. And to bring this back to the meditation conversation, it's to me, it's the same thing, because when you're meditating, you're taking your right brain to the gym, which is the piece of you that's not only in charge of present moment awareness, but it's the piece of us that feels connected to everyone and everything. It's the piece of us that feels connected to nature, to the rock, to your higher self, to your intuition. And if you look at a brain, it splits right down the middle, 50-50. And because most of us have only had access to our left brain waking state of consciousness, we're holding onto the rock so tightly with our hands. We're trying to control it. We're not trusting the rock. We're not trusting nature. We're not trusting that right brain other piece of us. And so within the meditation, it's like you get so good at surrendering in the chair that sense of surrender and trust starts to bleed into your waking state, which allows, you know, bigger accomplishments, bigger achievements that would have maybe scared you previously. You start to trust a little bit. You start to let go a little bit and see how nature wants to play out, because you're not as afraid of failing. Because what does that even mean, failing, right? It's like if you have access to your own bliss and fulfillment internally, which is what the meditation gives you, then nothing external can make or break you. This one launch, this one partner, this one zero in your bank account cannot make you. And if it can't make you, then it also cannot break you.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is like, it's like this, the shrinking of the amygdala, like the decreasing of fear, which allows you to accomplish more and to do what you were put on this planet to do.
Yeah, that was so well stated. And you just made me think of something that has been something that's really important to me for the last few years, and that is like a concept of trust or faith. And I don't mean it in a religious sense, like you need to be religious in order to find that, but an attitude of like trusting life and the universe and nature, or you can call it God if you have that sort of bend in your belief. But a trust that life and nature will unfold as it should,
Mm-hmm.
instead of trying to fight all the time and like worry all the time that if you're not there to control this and that and be the puppeteer, that things won't unfold and that bad things will happen. I'm just speaking sort of stream of consciousness here, but I know this connects to some extent to meditation. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on it, because for me, it's just kind of ideas in my head that are not that well connected, but you'd be the person to ask if you have some way of sort of making sense of that.
Sure. So, as a recovering control freak, I feel like I have a huge authority on this subject, and it's all I teach all day, every day. It's I joke that my class is not a meditation class; it's surrendering school. My class is a 10-hour class in surrendering, and it's trusting this process. It's trusting your body. It's trusting the technique, and then as you get good at trusting your body and the healing process in the meditation, you become more inclined to trust nature, to trust your employees, to trust your partner with your eyes open, because you start to see it really is that fight or flight thing. It's that control thing that has us constantly reviewing the past and rehearsing the future. And that we have to control if all we have is our left brain individuality waking state, right? Then it's like, well, if I don't do it, it won't get done, and no good deed goes unpunished, and all these other things that we've been trained our whole lives to think. Or if we've come from an abusive childhood, like if our parents didn't take care of us, or if they were addicts or alcoholics or abusive in any way, then we had to develop that sense of control, that sense of, well, I have to take care of myself. And to undo that wiring can take some time. And so that's why it's important that you commit to a daily practice to go in and rewire, to be like, you know what, the very thing that kept me alive as a child might not be serving me now as an adult. Now that I'm safe, I might have to actually drop those tools to step into the level of greatness that I want to step into. I have to allow for some magic. I have to allow for something bigger than me to come in and play a role here.
There are parts of your brain that come online more effectively when you start to meditate. One is the prefrontal cortex. So your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for thinking, planning, higher order organization, attention, inhibition. And bad news, as you age, your prefrontal cortex thins. Just like the rest of your body, stuff starts to kind of crenate, to get smaller and thinner. Good news, if you're able to maintain a long-term meditation practice, you can maintain the thickness of your prefrontal cortex even as you age. So there's a study from Dr. Sarah Lazar at Harvard. She put individuals in an MRI machine, looked at their prefrontal cortices, and in long-term meditators, there was one gentleman who had a prefrontal cortex thickness of a 25-year-old when he was 50. So meditation really thickens and strengthens that PFC.
Let's go deeper into the prefrontal cortex piece. Can you say exactly what the prefrontal cortex does and why it is that it thins and why it is that meditation counteracts that?
So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for many things in our brain. It's a large area behind your forehead. It's the forebrain, the front of your brain, the part that evolved latest. So down in the brainstem, in the hindbrain and the midbrain, you have more of our automatic nervous responses, breathing, seeing, etc. Although seeing is quite complex, you have a lot of cortical involvement in seeing. And then towards the front, you have planning, you have organization, you have, thinking about the future. All of these higher order human activities that we do. And as well, you have attention. So there are attention networks throughout your brain, but the frontal cortex is particularly involved in attention. And inhibition, the ability to stop yourself from doing things you probably shouldn't do. It's kind of like the prefrontal cortex is the parent of the brain. It's the thing that even when you're being driven to do something that's not that great for you, the prefrontal cortex is able to step in and say, nope, even though that felt like, an urge or a drive, we can override it and do the right thing. When your brain ages, it begins to thin. Why does that happen? Well, the same reason that the rest of your body, your skin becomes thinner, your muscles are less able to maintain their thickness and volume. You have to exercise more in order to keep the same muscle mass. And it's because the cells are getting old. The mitochondria are not functioning as effectively. You have a lot of oxidative damage that's happening. You have less blood flow and nutrients going to the brain, less ability to carry that and utilize it effectively. And so all of this leads to a thinning of the brain, a decrease in volume. Now, just like any muscle in your body, as you work it, you're able to maintain its functioning over time. So meditation really works, quote unquote, in the same way that you're working a muscle, works the prefrontal cortex. It's a targeted, focused exercise that you do for 5 to 20 minutes or more per day. And it is kind of like going to the gym for your attention. And so it is enabling the engagement of your prefrontal cortex repeatedly, which then allows it to function better over time. We've all heard if you don't use it, you lose it. And in this case, if you do use it, you maintain it. Mm-hmm. So meditation maintains the thickness of your prefrontal cortex.
With that in mind, are there particular types of meditation that are more effective or that you would suspect would be more effective if it hasn't actually been tested in maintaining prefrontal cortex thickness?
Sure. So you've all heard of various forms of meditation. A lot of them at their core come down to the idea of a focused attention meditation. So in a focused attention meditation, you're putting your attention on one thing. And that can be your breath. That could be a mantra, a word that you repeat over and over in your head. It could be staring at a candle. In any of these cases, the meditation practice is put your attention on that one thing. When your mind wanders away from that one object, you then notice that your mind has wandered and choose to bring your attention back. So that is the basis of a focused attention meditation. So you may be counting your breaths. You're counting your breaths. Eventually, your mind wanders away onto a thought. You start thinking that thought. You realize, oh, right, I'm supposed to be meditating. You then bring your attention back to your breath. You come back to counting. And that is an example of incredible use of your prefrontal cortex because you are using your attention. When your mind wanders away, you have to use your metacognition, your ability to observe your own mind, observe your own thinking, which is a prefrontal cortex function. Then you need to inhibit the thinking of the thought that you don't want to be having. And then you have to choose to bring your attention back to your breath and maintain your attention on your breath. So all of that is prefrontal cortex all over the place. There are other areas of the brain that also get involved in meditation. So, for example, in body-focused meditation, where you're maybe doing a body scan, which is another form of focused attention because you're moving your attention throughout your body, or even when you're focused on your breath, there's a part of your brain called the insula, and that's responsible for many, many things, including internal sensory processing and experience. And that also strengthens in a meditation practice.
This might seem like an obvious question, but I'm curious from a neuroscience perspective what the answer would be. Let's contrast what you were just describing with meditation, let's say focused on a particular object or a mantra or something like that. How would that period of focus, let's say you did that for half an hour or an hour, how would that differ from, let's say, what you and I are doing right now in this moment of being focused on this exchange of ideas, and the brain has to maintain attention on this particular thing to continue the conversation, to do what we're doing in this moment, playing off each other's expression of ideas. Or let's say sitting and reading a book, or being immersed in, I write books, for example, writing a book, and sometimes I might spend 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day immersed in a very deep state of focus in that writing. How does the effect differ, or the activation of the brain differ in those kinds of contexts versus in the context of closing your eyes and focusing on a mantra?
So brain activity is going to be different in each of those contexts, although they're going to be using a lot of the same networks and certainly using and strengthening your prefrontal cortex during those activities as well. However, when you meditate, there is the experience of a few other things that happen, which I can go through in a minute. One is as you are focusing your attention, you are reducing your brainwave activity down to this nice coherent alpha. And you're really, really peaking on that alpha activity. And some ways to think about alpha are kind of like it's the refresh rate of your brain. So as you age, the alpha peak frequency tends to decrease. So it's kind of like your brain's not refreshing as quickly. So when you're in meditation and closing your eyes and focusing on one thing and maintaining that internal sensory focused attention or external focused attention, you are bringing your brain into coherence. It's all kind of beating and moving more or less in the same rhythm. That's why sleep is such an effective tool, because in sleep, all of your brain activity when you're in deep sleep moves down to delta. And you have just this one pulsing, beautiful, deep delta rhythm. And the deeper your delta, the greater amplitude of delta that you have, the more of your brain that's recruited into this one activity of being coherent, the better the refreshing outcomes of sleep seem to be, the more rejuvenative, and the better effects for your brain and body. When you get more deep sleep, your sleep outcomes are better. So there seems to be something that's fundamentally different about the act of meditating than the act of, talking to somebody else or the act of even writing a book. Although writing certainly is also a deeply meditative state. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, I meditate, I drive and my mind wanders and that's my meditation. When you're mind wandering, that is not meditating. When you're just sort of sitting there daydreaming, letting your mind go, that is a different activity and doesn't have the same cognitive benefits that meditation does. Even though there may be the relaxation benefits, it doesn't have the same kind of brain training.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on a subjective level, what are the benefits of meditation?
There are so many benefits of meditation. By now, there are over 10,000 published scientific studies demonstrating the benefits of meditation to decrease your stress, improve your attention, improve your physical health, decrease pain sensation, to improve your length of your telomeres, to decrease the aging of the brain, to improve your scores in standardized tests like the GRE, to improve relationships, and on and on and on. Because it turns out that this one tiny little activity actually has tremendous impact in our minds and bodies and our lives. Can I take you a little bit deeper into why this is so effective?
Please.
Remember, I described a basic focused attention meditation. So in the focused attention meditation, you're putting your attention on your breath, your mind wanders away, you notice it, and then you bring your attention back to your breath. Well, in those moments, you are doing something that is quite unique. You're observing your own thinking. And instead of simply following the thoughts that are in your head, which is what most of us do, you have a thought, it's in your head, so you think it, you're supposed to be there. I have thousands of thoughts every day. Many of them are kind of repetitive, not particularly helpful, annoying, anxiety provoking. Some of them are lovely. And most of us don't really think about the thoughts in our head. We simply have them go through our mind. In meditation, you're asked to make a different choice about the contents of your own mind. You observe a thought that comes up, and instead of just thinking it, you choose to bring your attention elsewhere. You're essentially saying, I am choosing the contents of my own mind and my own brain. And so when you do that, what you end up really doing is curating the content in your own mind, which means that those thoughts that are stressful, negative, repetitive are things you can choose to not have again. Now, there might be the same thought that comes up 12, 15, 20 times, but over time, as you teach yourself, hey, I don't need to have that thought, the thoughts begin to move away. And so this changes not only your relationship to your thinking, but it ends up changing your relationship to a lot of the things that you've connected to yourself. So as you grow up, people might have told you you're not good enough, you're not capable. And as you begin to let go of the thoughts in your mind, you begin to make choices. You start to realize that many of those thoughts that you have may not be even true in the first place. Mm. And this tremendously shifts your sense of identity and also tremendously decreases your stress and actually has real physiological response in the body. So when we have a stressful thought, that thought actually triggers a neurochemical cascade from our hypothalamus to our pituitary gland down to our adrenal glands. It triggers cortisol to move throughout the body, and it really changes our chemical milieu. And there's a very famous study done by Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn. She is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. And what she identified was when we have negative thoughts, it actually has a real physiological chemical effect in our body. She demonstrated this using telomeres, which are the little caps on the end of your DNA. So it's like the little bit of DNA at the end that can degrade before you get to the actual DNA that matters. And she was able to demonstrate that moms who had chronic negative thinking had shorter telomeres, and those who took on a meditation practice that shifted their thinking from negative to positive actually were able to lengthen their telomeres because there was real chemical change that was going on in their bodies with this type of thinking, positive thinking versus negative thinking. So that's part of the reason why meditation has such a tremendous effect in our minds and bodies, because it's changing your thoughts, it's changing your relationship to yourself, and it's actually improving your physiology, improving your body.